All right, hi guys, how's it going? I hope that you guys listen to this video, that you guys are feeling like you're able to figure out your classes by now, hopefully, and kind of getting in a little bit of a different routine, but in a routine. I hope you're all doing well. I miss seeing you guys in class. Um, what I wanted to do with this is I just wanted to kind of go over the diagram with you. I want you guys to make sure that you do know what the parts are of the respiratory system and that you kind of have a general idea of what they do. So we're not going to go anything too crazy. So I'm just going to go start from 1 to 15. So number 1 is going to be, and I'm going to edit this while I talk to you guys, or label it. So number 1 is actually called a bronchus for 1 or a bronchi for 2. So I'm going to put bronchus slash bronchi for 2. So bronchis plural. So all the bronchus does is it's just an extension of the windpipe that's going to help shuttle air to and from the lungs. So it's just like acts as a shuttle. Number 2 is going to be called a bronchiole. And that's just a branch of the bronchus. So it's going to branch off of this bronchus. And that's going to just ensure that the incoming air is going to be supplied to each alveolus. All right, so it's just that extension of the bronchi. So number 3 is just a cross section of our ribs and intercostal muscles. Or I should say ribs and. So the ribs and intercostal muscles, so these guys are super important because this is going to be what helps us actually do the motion of breathing. So it protects the lungs while we contract them. And yep, so the ribs are going to be these kind of circles. The intercostal muscle is going to be what fills around the ribs. Number 4 is these guys right here, these little bubbles. Those are called alveoli for plural, or if you're just talking about one, it's an alveolus. So alveoli. And these guys have a super important job because they are what's responsible for that gas exchange in the lungs. So this is going to be actually where the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide molecules are going to happen in the bloodstream. So they're arranged in little clusters. We have like a little cluster right here, but they're actually going to be throughout the lungs. So off of each bronchiole, there's going to be some alveoli. So they're pretty much arranged throughout the lungs. Number 5 is going to be the diaphragm. So the diaphragm has a huge job in the respiratory system. This is going to be what helps contract or allow air into and out of the lungs. So when the diaphragm contracts, this is our diaphragm right here, it's going to flatten while you inhale. So this is going to create a vacuum. So everything's pressurized in your chest cavity. So this is all a pressurized system right here. When this diaphragm contracts, it's going to kind of create a vacuum that's going to allow air to pull into the lungs. So think of this guy as like pulling down. Air is going to fill these lungs because it's creating a vacuum. When you exhale, this guy's going to relax. And when it relaxes, it's going to push the air out of your lungs. So you guys will see a video on this, how this actually works. In the Ed puzzle, you'll see it all. It does pretty good illustration, so you'll see how that works in action. Number 6 is going to be what we call pleural space. So this pleural space is just a space that contains pleural fluid. is going to act as a lubricant during respiration. So it's going to help essentially protect the surrounding structures. So it's going to help protect those lungs. So if you guys remember, the circulatory system had a ton of checks when blood was circulating through the heart. The respiratory system is very similar in that it has a lot of checks to protect your lungs because they can be so vulnerable, and also help protect that pressurized cavity. All right, so this pleural space is just helping protect those lungs. 7 and 8 are both pleura, but they're different types of pleura. So 7 is going to be what we call parietal pleura. So we call it parietal pleura because it lines the chest cavity. So it's going to line this chest cavity. Or sorry, the chest wall. So it lines the chest wall. Number 8, again, is also a pleura. But this type of pleura is called visceral pleura. So this visceral pleura is going to line the lungs themselves. It's a very thin membrane that's going to cover the lungs. It's going to be very hard to peel off. So this membrane is just going to help protect the lungs. So these are both just the extra checks. They both provide protection and cushion for the lungs. Number 9, you guys should be familiar with. We talked about it in Unit 1. It's called the mediastinum. So that mediastinum, remember, we kind of identified it where like the heart kind of goes. So your heart actually sits like right in here. This mediastinum is pretty much defined as it divides the right and left bronchi. The right and left bronchi. So that's where this space is technically defined in the respiratory system, but same idea. Number 10 is what you guys probably typically think of in the respiratory system, which is your lungs. This is pointing to a lung. A couple cool things I want to talk about with lungs, since we're not going to be able to get to many like case studies or anything like that, but you guys saw earlier in the PowerPoint the tracheostomy tube that kind of goes right in here to help someone breathe. So we have what we call a pneumothorax, which is just a fancy term for a collapsed lung. You guys might have heard about this in Grey's Anatomy, to be honest. I think they always have some sort of pneumothorax. So we talked about how this chest cavity is very pressurized, right? So like everything is dependent upon not only the pressure in here, but in your atmospheric pressure, so the pressure on the outside, or in the atmosphere. So this rarely happens, but what could happen is air could leak into this pleural space, which would cause basically the air to push against the lung. So even if your diaphragm were to contract and you were to try to breathe in, this lung won't work. So we call it a collapsed lung. Pneumothoraxes can be air, blood, I think fluids, or other fluids. I'm not too sure, but I know the most common, even though they're rare, is air and blood. So what could happen, or what would happen, is a doctor would basically insert a needle into this pleural space, and they'd stick the needle in, and you would hear, if it was air, you'd hear ksh, so the air would just be released, your lung would inflate, and you should be able to breathe. If it was blood, they would just draw the blood from the pleural space, similar to like drawing blood from your arm or donating blood. And your air again would, or your lung again would reinflate, and you'd be able to get air. So pretty cool stuff. I remember I had a sports medicine teacher in high school who said that if, like, for whatever reason, you knew somebody for sure passed out and they had a pneumothorax, you could essentially stick a straw in to this space and it would do the same thing. But I'm going to highly suggest you don't do that, because if someone passes out, it could be a whole plethora of things. So we don't typically just go sticking straws in people's chest cavities. So don't do that. But that's her theory. Another thing that you guys are probably hearing a lot about is pneumonia. So I wanted to clarify what pneumonia would be. Pneumonia is just like a mucosa that is a fluid that's going to fill your lungs. So this lung space is just going to fill it up. There's tons of ways to treat pneumonia. You guys have probably heard of like the nebulizers, or especially with like COVID-19 going on, they have like respirators and stuff. So you just inhale this medication that's going to go into your lungs, and it's just going to dry out that fluid that's in your lungs. So again, there's a few different ways to treat it. The respirator is the most common way nowadays to treat it. But yeah, that is pneumonia. So a couple cool things going on with the respiratory system. We will talk about another one going on right now later on. So after you're completed with these notes, you will start that activity. So moving on to number 11. Number 11 is going to be our trachea. So our trachea. And you guys can actually feel your trachea if you were to either, some of you guys can just kind of feel it sitting up, but if you were to like kind of tilt your head back just a little and rub the front of your neck, you should be able to feel some ridges, though that is your trachea. Trachea is just a fancy medical term for windpipe. So again, yeah, if you guys can actually feel your trachea if you lean back. Number 12 is going to be our larynx. Our larynx. This guy is what houses our vocal cords. So I showed you guys this crazy video of our vocal cords not too long ago, or actually it was a while ago. I think it was probably just beginning second quarter. So this guy houses the vocal cords. Those were like the weird things when they move when you talk, and it looks just really cool. I know that the Institute of Human Anatomy on TikTok, he should have a cool video of that if you guys want to check it out. Number 13 is our epiglottis. So, and you guys talked about a lot of these in the notes already, so I'm not really going over them too much, but just really for identification. But the epiglottis is that cartilaginous flap that's going to kind of close over either your windpipe or your esophagus, depending on what you're doing. If you're breathing, it's going to close over this esophagus. If you're like swallowing food, it's going to close over this windpipe so it doesn't go in your lungs. Some of you guys have probably choked on water or felt yourself actually inhale water. I know I think there's like a challenge going on TikTok that I've heard where like you like drink out of like a paper towel roll. That's going down your windpipe, so that's why everyone's kind of spitting it back out, because it's not supposed to go down that way. It's supposed to go down the esophagus. So the epiglottis has a pretty important job where it's going to close off this windpipe and just allow into the esophagus if you're swallowing. If you're breathing, other way around. The pharynx is number 14. So the pharynx, it is, or it allows the inhaled air to make its way to the respiratory tract. So this is just a passageway to the respiratory tract with inhaled air through your nose. So 15 is our nasal cavity. You guys learned a few things about how like a nose is structured, how air is warmed in here, how there's like filters in there, like you have nose hairs that kind of filter out dirty air and kind of cause you to create a buildup of boogers, right? So that nasal cavity is where that initial inhale of air is going to come from, and then where that exhale is going to go if it's not coming from your mouth or exiting from your mouth. So this is the basic structure of the respiratory system. After you guys have, this should be the end of taking your notes. You should be at the end of that. So you guys have an ed puzzle to watch, and then you have an activity to do this week. So be sure to get to both of those. I suggest watching the video before the activity because the activity is on COVID-19 and how that affects the respiratory system. So it is a respiratory virus. So I would become fairly familiar with with the respiratory system before talking about COVID-19. I want you guys to know the structure, and I want you guys to actually know what's happening before getting to that lab. I know it's very interesting stuff because it's really relevant to the world right now. But please finish these notes so you have an understanding before going into it. Other than that, I hope you guys enjoy your week. Please email me if you have any concerns, and I will talk to you guys later.